Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Let's value everyone's time. It's 4:02 here in Singapore, and let's kick straight off and get into things. So I wanted to just start by saying thank you very much for dropping in and connecting in here. Some of you pretty last minute decided to jump on board, and we really appreciate the time that you've given to jump in here. Andrew and I are very thankful for your connection and for the interest that you're showing and what we're willing to share here as well. And this is the start of many webinars we hope to run in a series of webinars. And today we wanted to just briefly touch on a few things that we've noticed around transfer of learning into practice, and really the whole idea of how do we capitalize that whole idea of the effort we put into professional learning, and how do we transfer that to make that change? How do we make that change happen in the world that we live in that's changing? This post-pandemic state that we're in, how do we move to that state fluidly and fluently at the same time? But let me just start by introducing myself as well. And Andrew, of course, I'd love for you, maybe Andrew, why don't you kick it off with a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. A few of you know me, many don't. Andrew Mowat, I'm a long-time educator, intensely interested in the practice, the science, the art of professional learning. Have been in this space for 25 years or so, and find myself every day either in the middle of instructional design, coaching, or delivery. And with the work that Craig and I have been doing this year, I've had the privilege of talking to about 130 different creators, and a lot of today's work has emerged out of the constant conversation we're having around this idea of transfer. My last role was head of learning development for a company that will be familiar to a few of you, Cognita. So, and now I'm in this partnership with Craig, looking to really shift the way, pivot's an overused word, but starting to get better bang for buck for the effort we put into professional learning, the transfer being the thing that we're talking about today. So that's probably enough for me. Craig, how about yourself?
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. So I really, as you can tell from the thick accent, I am from New Zealand, the better neighbour of Andrew's country of Australia, and it's a pleasure to be here in Singapore. And I've been in Singapore now for 10 years, which is a long time for an expat or a teacher, but sort of becoming pretty common. I'm one of those international school teacher tragics that thought that he would come over and work in an international school for a couple of years. And 10 years later, my wife and I are still here and still loving it. And we now have two little rugrats, 3 and 7, that we want to chase around the world as well once this pandemic ends. So, we moved here. I'm a teacher, so my background is teaching and leadership, and I've worked in schools my whole life. So prior to moving to Singapore, I was in a public school system in New Zealand. I was a teacher, an assistant principal, and then moved to Singapore, worked in a small Australian curriculum school where I led the development of a middle school and a tech program, and then took on the role of head of educational technology and innovation at Stanford American International School here in Singapore, 3,500 students. And my job was to support the authentic and purposeful use of technology and learning into classrooms and meeting rooms. So from there, about 2.5 years ago, I took on the role that I thought I'd never do, which was the role of a consultant. As a teacher, I thought, another consultant. A consultant is someone that's so removed from the classroom. Why would I want to learn from them? And I very quickly learned that, I was so wrong, and there are a lot of people that probably are removed from the classroom. But as a consultant, I had the choice. I had the choice to involve myself in schools, or I had the choice to stand back and preach from the rooftops about what I think should happen. And I chose the first part. I chose to involve myself and engage with schools and be in the schools and chat to them and engage in strategy and development. And that's really where the development of my passion for professional learning came from, both as a learner and as a leader of learning. And it's an exciting part to be in as well. And today, Andrew and I want to sort of touch on those points as well. So, what we've identified is that schools very rarely are learning organizations. They are more often teaching organizations. And today, Andrew is going to dive into this in a deeper way to give you a bit of an understanding. So, Andrew, I'm going to pass over to you and let you share your huge amount of expertise.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. It's a real, to me, it's hugely ironic, isn't it, that we're on about learning, but as organizations, on a number of measures, we're not really learning organizations. We're into this delivery mode rather than reception mode. So we're seeing a change though. And I think more and more we're asking to have professional learning deliver more than it has. The very quick story for me around the part of this, and I said to myself at the start of this year that I was going to find a way to get better return on that effort. The effort you've put in, for instance, the time effort you've put in to join today, hopefully we give some value, and we want to increase always the value that turns into visible practice change in the classroom. And typically for me over the years, I haven't seen much transfer. I was caught up in the hubris, if you like, of the sort of the joy of delivering a program for Cognita, which is based around, and Charlie would know this one, around quality conversations and giving feedback and having meaningful, important conversations with people. And in a day-long program that I was lucky enough to travel the world to deliver, I'd hate to think of how much effort and time and money was put into the delivery of this program to over 1,000 people. The actual true, real, authentic transfer was pretty minimal because of a range of things. So I want to talk today about the things that get in the way of transfer. We do loads of learning, but I don't know if there's loads of visible change that comes from learning. And it will never be 100% transfer, but I don't think it's anywhere near 10% in my view. What we're going to do today is to show and share a range of models. Sophie would know I'm a model geek, and so I really geek out on not only other people's models, but building my own. And at the end, clearly, we're on about EduSpark, and we won't ignore the fact that at the end, we'll talk about what we're doing in EduSpark to try and meet these. We're trying to address these systemic issues that we're finding in a way that maybe starts to eat away at this inefficiency we've got at the moment. So for me, the problems that I see in the world of transfer, educational practice transfer, often from these conversations, don't have the time to actually implement and play with and develop, make meaning of, immerse ourselves in the new learning. So I learn something one day, but go back to the job, the classroom, the chalkboard, the office the very next day. So there's very little time. A lot of teachers say, actually, we're trying to do personalized learning differentiation, but actually we don't personalize for teachers. So therefore, one size fits all is often what we're doing in teacher training. And interestingly, one of the guys who we interviewed quite early in EduSpark, Yong Zhao, talks about not personalized learning, but personalizable learning. There's a subtle difference there. Often we don't really deeply measure the impact of learning and that transfer and the degree to which that transfer is visible to others around us. And we're in a very, what's the word, uncohesive? That's not the right word, but we're not in a cohesive environment. Cohesive vertically, where we're teaching teachers in the way that we want kids to be taught, that professional learning is in line with goals, organizational and strategic goals. Everywhere where we look, there are these lack of connections between what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve and what we're actually having to be forced to shape to. For a lot of people in the professional learning space, finding quality providers of learning is an issue. And so therefore people who lead professional learning in schools spend time trying to source quality professional learning that matches strategic need. And then there's a whole administering and organizing. And often this professional development thing is a tack on to HR. And I was in the middle of implementing a program which was all about tracking PD, but in fact, it was a tack onto HR and it just measured hours. So it's much more about compliance and that everyone's doing something rather than what they're doing. So these are some of the problems that we're seeing. But what I'd love to hear from you guys, just because I know some of you, I'm going to maybe tap a few on the shoulder, but I'd love to hear from one or two of you. What do you see as the problems around PD provision? And Charlie, you and I have had many conversations like this before. I'm wondering if you might come off and just say, what is it that you're seeing in the problems that surround your capacity and the work that you do in your role around providing PD to the people in your school setting? Charlie, I don't know if you've got a chance to.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. I'm here. No, thank you. This is great. I think one of the problems is the transfer bit. So, the transfer of what is learned and what is absorbed into real tangible outcomes in practice. And I think time can be an issue, certainly in the school setting, but making sure things aren't one-off, making sure things are continuous, that they're embedded kind of culturally, and that transfer bit and personalizing any PD that's received, because a lot of the times PD can be very universal and applicable to many different contexts. And I think that's where the magic is taking what's learned, applying it to your context, and dare I say, innovating off it. So transferring it into practice that's meaningful for you as the recipient of the PD.
Really insightful comment. And I'd love to invite other people just to come off mute and add a comment or two, please, because we want to make this a conversation rather than a presentation, if it makes sense. You yourselves making sense of the models that we're presenting. So are there any other comments and thoughts in there?
I guess I'll tune in then. So a lot of PD is basically just you sit down and you listen for an entire day. I know what's going to happen in the next few weeks. We have our PD session. That's going to happen. There's very little action research. So in terms of, and also it's all kind of one-off. So there we go. We've had your PD, and then we'll see you in a year's time. There, I've done it now. Whereas I see it more as, well, this is the beginning of a conversation. You then do the research in the classroom, because I'm a science teacher, so I love research. And then you come back and kind of reflect on those results and see if there's actually any action from what you've actually been doing in the classroom.
Yeah, well said again too. And the one and done, it's not my term, but I heard this and I thought, yep, that's exactly what it is. We can tick that off. So it's a compliance-based rather than a developmental frame. The other model I'm seeing that opposes that emerged very quickly in the COVID world is the watch video, do quiz, get certificate. And that's equally as inefficient and maybe more seductive. People know that the big one and done sessions don't really deliver, but if you're paying attention to a series of videos and you do a quiz and you get a certificate, you think, wow, I've learned, it's good on us. But in fact, the amount of work, learning is where the work is. And I'll show you a model in a second that describes this from a neuroscience point of view. Charlie knows this one, for example. And it's if there's no work inside the brain of the person who's the recipient, the learner, then there's no gain, no move forward. So thanks, Michael. And I am going to move on, but
I think,
come off mute. Yeah, go for it.
Let me just jump to a couple of things in the chat as well. So Eileen shared
perfect. Thanks, Craig.
A couple of things. So Eileen shared that PD, if the PD isn't directed by leadership's vision, it's really hard to make that transfer happen. I think we've all seen that in schools we've probably all worked in as well. I know I have, where, we have a big group of people that want to go in a personalized direction with their learning, but often that doesn't sit with leadership's vision. So where does that take you as a learner as well within that space? And then leaders being able to give ownership back to their teachers to say, hey, this is where we're going, but you can personalize your learning by, jumping on these sorts of learning opportunities as well. And a couple of other things, April pointed out that whole idea of that one-off session, and it's about ticking boxes. And Cassandra, Cassie, you sort of jumped on the point of that tick and flick type idea. And I love that too. And there's plenty more coming in the chat as well, but thanks for sharing. Keep sharing it in. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Craig, and please interrupt. I'm notoriously poor at reading chat boxes when I'm in delivery mode, so I appreciate that interruption. And please, anyone, if I start on something, please interrupt at any time. It's really important. One of the things that I did when I was considering this, I was lucky enough to work at the Australian International School, as did Sophie, for a number of years. And I think that's probably the school that had the best learning culture that I've ever found. And if I sort of pick the eyes out of the schools that I've been involved in some way, this is a list of the observable features that learning organisations have. And there's a point I want to bring to this about how many of these you might identify in your own organisation. Resources about access to time, funding, those sorts of things. The vision, which was just called out then, do we see ourselves, have we got an articulated mission or vision that positions us as a learning organisation, and an expectation that we ourselves as teachers are in fact learners as well. Process, how do people access equitably the learning that they need, policies that support that. Is it aligned to the school strategic goals and where the school wants to go over a period of time? How do we curate quality so that what we present into our schools gives us good value for money in terms of learning and development and ultimately transfer opportunity? How do we engage people? One of the things I loved at AIS under the leadership of then Richard Owens, Dr. Richard Owens, who's now in Melbourne, he had these TIGs, teacher inquiry groups, where the engagement was very much around these small cells of, as Michael made the point before, action research around a key focus question. And so that's a school starting to do its own internal research around issues. And some of those rose to become quite significant strategies over time. Some actually died a natural death, as you'd expect in this. What's the impact of the learning? How can we measure culture? And I'm speaking to all of that. And to what degree, I think this is the highest degree of development in this, to what degree do we have people within our school presenting back within to the school, rather than having to source the expertise outside of the school? Is the school, the organisation, developing its own ability to self-source? And I know that there are conversations, Charlie, with you and with Ray Lang around building the capacity within the school to self-deliver the learning development that's required to some degree. So if we move through the next iteration of this slide, what I've got for you is this sense of above or below the line. And if you can tick off 0 to 2 of these things, then I reckon you're, as a school or organisation, I don't think there's much relevance. Maybe that's a bit harsh. I see a lot of schools that are struggling with this. And when you tick off these as strategies or observable features in a school, then you get this group here. Schools that are sort of starting to get a handle on all of this are in this emerging stage, but not yet above the line. But when we've got most of these ticked off, then we're starting to really move into the realm of the school being able to call itself, I keep calling school, it could be organisation, a learning organisation. And the ones that are really checking off most of these are really in that hugely empowering place, empowering its own staff to have a massive impact on the people that the staff serve, the students. And ultimately, that's where all this is going. Let's not forget that the outcome here is all about improving the capacity of kids to live in a modern world as we have right now and solve the problems that we're leaving them. Any comments or thoughts on this as a graphic? Any insights that are emerging from this? Anything I've missed? Makes sense. Any disagreement? It's just some thinking. So, no, it's landing well. So, to me, then, if we position the problems and what this does is, as an organisation, you should say, well, actually, I reckon we're emerging as a school. I think we're establishing, and the whole point behind this is to find a pathway up through these steps. How can we address each of these things on the left as strategies to move forward? So hence the title, 4 Reasons. So I'm quickly going to go through 4, and I'd love you to sort of think about which is the one that's present and relevant to you right at the moment. It could be more than one. So part of the problem we've got is learning design. And this is a model from the Neuro Leadership Institute, David Rock. And some of you know that I'm a real fanboy of this particular model. And it's called the AGES model, attention, generation, emotion, spacing. 4 elements required for learning to be sticky. Primarily, the neuroscience research was around adults, but I see this as being really relevant to kids as well. And I know Sophie's, who's in the space of metacognition, she's nodding away there. I can't see everyone in the mode that I'm in. Naomi, great to have you on board too. And if you want to have a chat at any point, please give us a yell. So this is a key model for if we can't deliver each of these in our learning design. So that means the way we construct the learning assets, the engagements, the whole content piece, if you like, if we're not mastering and harnessing attention, if the participants, as both Michael and Charlie mentioned before, are not doing the work, if we don't attach some emotion, and there's a surprising emotion that's the most powerful one I'll talk about in a second, and then not providing the spacing, then we're not actually in our core model delivering something that's robust in a learning opportunity in terms of transfer. That hubris that I spoke about before was the delivery of the quality conversations piece that I was lucky enough to go to South America, Europe, and Asia to deliver under Cognita. Got caught up in good feedback. HR loved it. The number of people being ticked off going through this program, all around the ability to say what needs to be said, particularly in appraisal settings. And the one piece that was missing, because I'd spent a lot of time making sure that there was good learning design from a neuroscience point of view behind that, the one thing I couldn't deliver in a day-long program was spacing. And I did an audit of the number of points I was delivering in a day-long program, and it was 60. They were related, 60 separate points of delivery. Now, how can the brain be possibly able to provide and make that learning stick so that someone goes the next day? And in fact, my own narrative around this is that a few heads came back to me and said, Andrew, that great program, but I've still got staff coming to me saying, I'm going to have a difficult conversation, boss. What do I do? And these people would say, but didn't you just recently do Andrew's program? Hugely disappointing to me to hear those stories, but a bit of a wake-up call that the one and done day-long program, as Michael called out before, no matter how well it's designed and even delivered, can be very problematic. One way we get at that, by we, the work that Craig and I are doing in particular, is around this community of practice model. And it's not simply 3 steps. It's learning's messy, and we're taking a while to actually get to the point where what we're doing is being delivered through the platform we're building. But we've got this acquisition phase, and the world is really powerfully built around content acquisition. But then we ask the question across the top, what action follows my learning? And we go into this implementation stage of doing stuff, getting on the bike. I made the comment this morning in a workshop that I ran that if you want a 6-pack, you can't do that by watching someone else in the gym. You can't turn up at the gym, put all the gear on, sit in the corner and watch people do the exercise. The transformation, the transfer doesn't happen. So you've got to get the fingernails dirty. You've got to roll the sleeves up. So that implementation piece is key. And then one thing to close the loop here is to contribute back to the bunch of people who are interested in the same domain of learning, the things you learned, the things you acquired, and the frustrations that you might have felt. Now, in the previous slide, I spoke about emotion, and I mentioned that one of the surprising emotions that has the biggest impact on neuroplasticity in adults, not so much kids, but adults, is frustration. And the feeling of frustration drives a lot of neuroplastic response, which at the end of the day is what we want. If we're going to see transfer, there has to be new connections in the brain. So it's that contribution piece that reflects back. Here's what I did well in. Here's what I worked well with. Here are the friction points. Here are the problems I had. And to work through iteratively, hard for me to say at this time of the day, through this cycle of learning. And to share back what learning came from my action, and then to ask at the other corner, so what next? And we work through in an iterative response. Time to stop. Have a sip. Craig, are there any comments coming in or any thoughts from the group?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in. If there's anyone else, please jump in as well. I think the feedback really is around this model, is that this model or the visual really does help people in thinking about that understanding. How do we get into that learning design space? How do we, identify other perspectives and inspire that transfer that you talked about earlier on? So it's that whole idea of how do we take learning and actually impact that and make it impactful in the settings that we're in.
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig. Can see some of those comments as you're working your way through there. Moving on to the second problem, and I'm looking at the time and make sure that we finish in well. We'll hang around afterwards if anyone wants to Q&A any of this. Delivery design. So we had our learning design, how we structure our content, but then the delivery, and that one-day delivery piece I spoke about before is part of the problem. Sometimes we try to deliver the whole damn jigsaw all at once, and we don't give people time to construct their pieces to create their own pictures. And there are times, back to the learning design, that it's our picture that we're asking people to construct, not their own. And so that capacity for variations of the standard picture to be built, but a piece at a time or a few pieces at a time, and in different ways rather than just as individuals. And I'll call that out in a bit. Naomi would recognize this one. This is, I have to acknowledge, Naomi, a lot of this thinking came out of the work that you and I did around this, and I've shared this a lot. So left to right, if I'm in expert mode as a deliverer, as the creator of learning, then I'm someone who's saying the contract is I'm an expert, you follow what I say and you'll learn what I know. And therefore I'll structure the content in a particular way and you'll follow that structure. And it's often in this self-paced environment that this occurs. So LinkedIn Learning is very strongly built around this. No criticism, it's where we're starting from. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that's where we finish, but I think this is where we start from. And so a lot of the world's training and online learning opportunities are in this top left side, self-paced learning in expert mode. What I'm seeing other people do is move away from controlling the learning into playing in the more facilitative space. So where do we go next, folks? Here are some provocations. What's the next point of engagement for you? And to start to move much more to the facilitator mode at the right-hand side, where at its extreme, it might be a community that co-constructs its own learning, defines its own learning, and is quite content light to begin with, whereas the expert mode is content heavy. And so I'm seeing more and more people in the people that we work with as creators playing in this space in the middle, where they're sort of roving between expert and facilitator, self-paced, which is often asynchronous, down to deep learning, which is often synchronous. The highest value that a creator can bring is their own ability to help others make meaning of their content and of their learning. So that's often synchronous. So a mix of those two with maybe some learner agency about what they choose and when they go deep. So that's some of the work that in particular Naomi and I started to talk about in some of the work that we were doing together. So Michael, I'm just looking at your comment there. Yeah, the quadrants, Naomi, that's the trick, is not to be stuck in one quadrant, but to be able to rove between, depending on learning need, the individual needs of the people who are training, and the learning design itself. Yeah, and I get that, Michael. If the answers are not known, then I think it's up to the group to find a way. And it's a bit like coaching in a bigger sense. If someone says to me when I say, where do you think you might go next? And someone says, I don't know, I stay away from the provision of the answer and the solution if I'm a pure coach, and I'll start to say, so what do you need to do to be able to find out? What steps do you take to know this? And so again, the solution or the answer responsibility sits with the learner rather than the expert or the creator, if that makes sense. Yeah, spot on, Naomi. Just reading that as we go forward. Another model that fits this, and this is reason 3, moving on, and this is rich for deeper exploration, and we might pick one of these and go through a deeper engagement around this in the future. This is out of the CCL, the Creative Centre for Leadership. I don't know how robust the research is behind this, but the 70-20-10 rule says that we learn 10% from courses, 20% in our interactions from people, And if I can move myself out of the way, then experiences and challenges, particularly the challenges, is where a good bulk of the learning comes from. So if this model is true, then just providing course and course content, which is where we've started from, but it's where we'll move away from very quickly, is insufficient in our contemporary world. So therefore, we need to create connections between people and connections between people and the content and the experiences and challenges, and to sort of draw two models together. That's where this community of learning, community of practice model starts to come in, where we're connecting people with the implementation and the content and the acquisition over a period of time. So that's the third one, engagement. And engagement design, often when we're delivering courses, we often think about delivering to an individual asynchronously. I'd love people to start to think about, and I know some of the work I've done with Charlie and his school is all around getting people to start to connect together around the content synchronously, or to at least explore and converse together around the content. So sometimes with asynchronous content, rather than consuming alone, maybe a meeting, a senior leadership team considers one component, and the team works through that one learning asset at that time and then discusses and makes meaning of that as a leadership team. You can distribute that across a whole school, or working with a buddy. So breaking away from the perception that in fact we're talking to and driving to individuals who consume our content. And then lastly, this organizational design. It just scares me to see how much siloing there is at so many different levels, between staffs in schools, between individuals in schools, between departments, between schools. How many brilliant and wonderful creators we've been in touch with that are all doing work independently and in a disconnected way often, without the ability to understand the metrics of engagement that might come out. And Craig will talk about measuring all of this in some ways. And unifying this is something that will provide tremendous opportunity. So unifying within a school, unifying between schools, and unifying between creators, thought leaders, authors, speakers. And by unifying, I mean just hang out in the one place where we can see all of these different things happening at once, rather than going to this website over here or that person's masterclass over there. It's just a crazy disaggregated world, the world of education, in a way that I've not seen in any other particular group of area of work. Craig, any comments as I pause there?
No, there's a few things coming in though, Andrew. Check out the chat. There might be a few answers that you can give people or discuss about too. I think the idea of the data-driven decisions that are being made, not just in schools, but in platforms like with EduSpark, is that, you know, it's, and Michael pointed this out, is that, you know, there is a lot of research that goes in here, and that needs to be front and center when, you know, these thorough decision-making processes being made, not just in platforms such as with EduSpark, but in schools, and the decision-making in schools as well.
Yeah, and I think the use of data is still not mature in education, particularly professional learning. There's an assumption that do this course and it's worked. And yes, often we do feedback on courses and we do post-course measurement. But what we're not measuring, and it's hard to measure, so that's part of the problem. We're not measuring engagement, we're not measuring contribution of a learner, and we're not measuring transfer. And that's hard to measure, but one of the things we're after is to find a way to actually interrogate learners to see and get a sense of how much of this that you're learning now is visible to other people who surround you, your peers in your work. So it's the data, though, that we see, that Craig and I see, as being that sits behind all of this, the engagement that a staff member has, how often they're engaging in learning. For a leadership team to see what their staff professional learning engagement metrics might be, that's hugely valuable in terms of strategy and impact, and even working with individuals, to the point where you might even see someone starting to tail off in their learning engagement, and that might be an indicator that they're preparing to leave and go to another place. On the other side, with the creator engagement, this for me is super exciting in the sense that we've now got 44 now, Craig, as of this afternoon, 44 courses with 100 or so people that are building in this one platform. And once we have these metrics in place, we'll start to be able to measure what learning design works, what delivery design works, what sort of engagement design works in particular. And we'll start to build a very quick picture of particular styles that creators are trying. And there's a huge diversity of what people are doing within the platform. And we'll say, well, actually, this one works. You know, it was Naomi in the course that she's building, and she's getting great engagement success, and we're getting transfer success. Let's look at what she's doing. So we've now got something to work with in terms of understanding which of these design areas. And the point that I think Irene makes is exactly right. We don't have enough data to underpin at a macro level, at a meta level, because we're all disaggregated. So the disaggregation works against big picture ideas that are driven by data that help us inform how to improve the ability to help adults learn. So as a final point here, Craig, before I throw back to you, that those four things fit into, as would be typical for me. I think I'd see Sophie having a laugh there, knowing me being the model geek I am. I tried to fit these things into some sort of 2x2 matrix, which I try to do to life sometimes too much, but you can see some sit with the creator, some sit more with the learner, some are about content, some are about process. But at least now, hopefully, you've got an understanding of some things that are getting in the way of transfer. And I think it's not one thing. I think it's a combination of a number of things. And that combination is different depending on the creator and what they're presenting and the learner and their organization. And so at least if we've got this dance mat of understanding what things strategically we can focus on to improve over time, then the premise is, and it's a premise at this point, the premise is that we'll improve that transfer over time. So yeah, LTSI, that looks really interesting, Eileen. I might have to talk to you a lot more about this. Thank you very much. So yeah, buzzwords, looking at that one too, Eileen. What I love about the conversation I had with Yong Zhao is that he calls almost everything in education snake oil. He's got a free course inside the platform. It's worthwhile having a look at. It's literally a conversation I had with him that's recorded effectively as a podcast. And he starts to poke holes in a lot of our institutional approaches and strategies at the education space. So buzzwords, weasel words, snake oil, these are some of the words that some people are using, that our fads that we love in education, the silver bullet syndrome, so to speak. So if there are no comments to me directly, and mindful of time, Craig, I might throw to you if that's okay.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Andrew. I'm just putting the link to Yong Zhao's program there in the chat for people as well. So, I'm very conscious of time. We've got about 5 minutes or so, and I want to value that time as well. But really wanted to talk all the things that Andrew talked about there. I really wanted to give you some touch points as to, for those of you who have been, following along with EduSpark on our journey. To give you a bit of history, we created this idea about 8 or 9 months ago now, from several years of engagement and discussions and ways of moving forward. And we only went live with EduSpark 7 or 8 weeks ago now. So it's a very new platform and a very new idea that we're continuing to mold, created by educators for educators, trying to create something that really does make a difference and changes the way we do things. So, thinking about where we are now and where we're going, our big focus has been to curate learning, bringing together not just amazing, best global minds, but also partnerships with companies, teachers next door. In the work I do, I talk a lot about the teacher next door model. And in my opinion, some of the best learning I've ever had was when I went next door to my teaching partner next door and saw them in action or chatted to them. And unfortunately, in this world we live in, we often get thrown these thought leaders in our schools that we're paying thousands of dollars to have in our schools, but we often miss some of the people next door that should be sharing, some of the amazing things that are happening in our local schools. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to find the best of the best, curate it, and bring it in. We don't believe that it should be your job as a busy teacher or a busy leader to go out there and find the people. It's our job to curate the best of the best, listen to feedback, pull people in. And that's what we're doing. As Andrew said, 44 courses now, on the 700 lessons within those courses across domains, 11 domains, including literacy, numeracy, well-being, leadership, DEIJ, social emotional learning, inquiry, the list goes on. An incredible amount of content and learning coming with two, along this top here, two new features that will be dropping in the next 2 weeks. One being live video, so the opportunity to have synchronous and asynchronous learning all within one platform, which will allow for that engagement and delivery design to be pretty authentic, move away from other models that we've seen around. And then the one that I'm most excited about is the development of this communities of practice idea. How do we build and develop a professional learning network where we can connect and learn with others? And Andrew talked about, this is where the learning starts. This is not where the learning is. This is not where the learning ends. This is where the learning starts. It's not a do a course, do a quiz, get a certificate. It's engage in learning, demonstrate your learning, and converse on that learning. Have conversations that actually are meaningful. And some of you might argue this, but I don't go to a conference necessarily to learn from amazing people. I go to a conference to connect with people. Conferences for me are the connection. And that's often what's missing in learning, the ability to connect and engage with people that you can bounce ideas off, that you can converse with, people that you're connected to online, but you've never met face to face. Conferences will still be there, but they're a way for us to connect and engage and learn with each other as well. The whole idea of certifications, when you complete a program, that's important for people, accreditation of those courses. We're working on that on the blockchain as well. And we're working on some pretty cool things around appraisals and assessments. The whole idea of developing teacher portfolios. The idea of a seesaw portfolio for students. Imagine if we could develop something that, and we're in this production right now with some of our partner schools, is how do we build a portfolio that actually shows and demonstrates a teacher's learning and understanding that they can not only use to shake up their appraisal systems in their schools, but they can also take with them on their journey as a teacher and a leader. Wherever you go, you can take this with you. And it's not just a mark on a paper or a certificate. It's an evidence-based portfolio that you can use in your practice. And I think that ties into what we're doing with data insights as well. And if you want to see more, I would love to take you through and show you more. Give us the opportunity to show you. And there's no obligation either. I want to be able to jump in and show you what we can do. And the last thing here before we go to the next slide, Andrew, is one of the things that we're noticing when we're having conversations organically with schools is the ability to build your own courses. So within EduSpark, you can do this for free at no additional cost. You bring your staff on board, you can build your own courses, whether it's a safeguarding course, a new teacher orientation course, the ability to personalize that learning experience for your teachers, gather everything that's around, but also personalize that learning as well. If we can go to the next slide there, Andrew.
Craig, I might, in the mind, looking at time, I might just move to the strategies if that's okay.
Yep, absolutely. So, Andrew talked about this below the line and above the line. How do we get there? How do we move to that space? And there's a few things. It's the idea of not just delivering a platform with content, it's engaging in a strategy to be authentic and purposeful about the impact that can have, that transformation that learning can have. So it's identifying those goals and those needs. And I think Michael pulled some of those things out before when he said, we don't always know what we don't know. And when we're identifying those problems, we have to align those with strategic goals. And I think a lot of schools that I work with and have worked in, it's that culture where people want to learn. I talk about culture a lot, that whole idea of connecting and engaging. And good point here, Michael, as well, that idea of not just a culture of continuous improvement, but it's that culture of continuous questioning and that whole inquiry mindset where we ask questions and we push boundaries and we challenge the status quo in that learning space as well. And that's what we're doing. We're providing that platform that does that. That delivers that community of practice scaffolding. We help people have those conversations and put them with people that might want to have those conversations, push boundaries, literacy, numeracy, well-being, primary years program teachers. We can develop communities of practice within our school as well. You have probably worked in big schools, just like I have, where I'd love to have conversations with some of the high school teachers, but there's no way I'm ever going to have time to find them. So developing these online communities of practices where this conversation can happen, where we can have those conversations. And I think the whole idea as well is, how do we implement that learning and engage people in that learning? How do we interrogate that learning? How do we share it amongst others and build that capacity, but also build the capability for people to design, build, and deliver their own learning programs as well? It's not just okay to say, hey, you can sit and you can take, but let's actually involve you in the process. Learning, I've always found, and I've got a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I say to my 7-year-old all the time, the best way for you to learn this is to teach me how you do it. Teach me this and you will learn it. And that's how I believe we need to change this way of professional learning. Get everyone in front and get everyone to share their learning. If you can go to the next slide there, Andrew. And very quickly, and we'll skip over this pretty quick here, Andrew, but we want to give you some options here to engage with this. We want to offer you some free seats and some trials. We want to give you the opportunity to have a discussion about how can we help you co-create a plan for partnership. We're already partnering with several large schools all over the world. We've got schools in Singapore, a school in Vietnam, we've got schools in Germany, Brazil. We've got a whole bunch of schools coming on board at this very, very early stage. And what we're saying is we don't want to give you a solution. We want to partner with you on this journey. We want to create this roadmap for success together. Yes, we're doing some great things. We're giving you some great ideas. We're connecting you with some amazing people and giving you the tech to deliver on that promise of transformation. But we want your voice. We want this to not be we're here doing great things. We want you to be involved with this. We want you to co-create, and we want you to help develop these targets as well. So we want to be able to help you develop EduSpark to be that complete PD solution. Not just PD, but learning. This is where learning happens. And we want to partner with you on that. So if you can skip to the next slide there, Andrew. The last slide is where, and there you go, place Andrew's face right in the middle. Look at that. We want to have a conversation with you. So this is a way that we would love you to connect with us. Socials on the left. If you just remove yourself, Andrew, look at that, like magic. You can scan this QR code. It'll take you to a form, or you can go to bit.ly/1 month and then capital ES for EduSpark, and we'll give you a free month to explore everything. Jump on board, and I'm more than happy to extend this to anyone in your buildings, anyone in your PLN. This is about bringing communities together. We would love to have your support. I'd love to be able to show you what we're doing. And Andrew, I'll pass back to you to finish off here.
Thanks very much, my friend. So hopefully that's given you, besides, clearly we're excited with what we're doing. So we wanted to share that, and hopefully that's not too much of a commercial feel with it. Quite clearly we need that, but hopefully we added some value to you today as well, and understanding this big game that I think we've not been very good at. In spite of being educators, we're not very good at educating ourselves, and we're very keen to work with people, discover, learn, build over time to try and move to a place where we might be better at doing this.